So good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us this morning for our latest webinar. We're just going to give everyone a couple more minutes to join. We can see that the numbers in the attendees list are sort of ramping up quite rapidly now. So we're just going to give everyone another minute or two to join, and then we shall get underway.
We're being so quiet, Steve. It's probably a good idea that we keep moving so that people don't join and think that the screen's frozen.
Very true, Matt. Very true.
Yeah.
We've got another a few more coming in, so we'll just give it one last minute just to let the last of the stragglers in, and then we'll get underway. Okay, good stuff. All right. Well, I think it's 2 minutes past now, so we'll get in and get underway with some introductions. So yeah, good morning, everyone, and welcome once again. So if you've joined us on any of our IPI webinars before, welcome back. If you're new, I'm Steve Murray. I'm Solutions Director here at IPI. So really, I head up the sort of applications side of things here at IPI. So anything to do with sort of compliance, automation, self-service, all that sort of cool, exciting stuff is my responsibility here at IPI. IPI are a systems integrator, specializing in customer experience and contact centers. And sort of our mantra is exceptional customer contact. So we're helping customers with both consultancy and technology solutions to drive better business outcomes, really, for them and their end customers. And I'm joined by my esteemed colleague and good friend Matthew Briers of Speik. So Matt, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you very much for the invitation today. Really looking forward to it. I'm the vice chairman of Speik and co-founder. Speik is an organisation that supplies hosted voice applications for security and compliance. So we're going to look at a couple of those today around PCI compliance for the contact center. We also support mobile recording and conferencing and things like that.
Brilliant, thanks, Matt. So in terms of today's agenda, really, obviously we'll be following very closely the detail which was sent out in the invite, but we're going to have a very quick sense check of the market. We've got some really interesting data that's come from a very up-to-date sort of in the midst of COVID Gartner report that was issued. So gives a quite interesting perspective. We did use some of that same data on a previous webinar a few weeks ago, but what we've done is kept some polls within it. So we want to have a kind of check really of how things have perhaps changed, you know, over the last few weeks since the last webinar, against the backdrop of that data and obviously the situation we find ourselves in at the moment. It's going to be very relevant for the topics today. We're also then going to look at the sort of top strategies used at the moment in UK contact centres for compliance. We're then going to look at some of the solutions and approaches which you can use, and then we're going to do some live demos as well. So I think between the combination of a GoToWebinar, some live demos, some polls, you know, what could possibly go wrong doing all that remotely and sat at home. So fingers crossed, but I'm sure hopefully you'll find the session useful and informative today. So what I felt it was probably useful to do, you know, we've got a lot of attendees on. There's probably a difference in experience with contact center compliance and sort of payment compliance within contact centers. So appreciate this may be old news to some of you, but I know we've got some people on the call who are sort of just starting that discovery journey. So we're going to be using a number of terms today. Obviously, the technology industry, in fact, most industries are riddled with sort of acronyms and TLAs. So just thought it was worthwhile just touching on a few of these terms that we're going to be using today. So we've got a sort of baseline understanding, and you're not sort of sat here going, Steve and Matt, you know, what on earth are you talking about when you say PSP? So CDE is going to be a term we're using, and that is referring to the sort of cardholder data environment. So this is the actual sort of if you like, the ring, if you like, of cardholder data, and how that sort of enters your business and sort of what happens within it. We're also going to be using the term DTMF suppression as well. So that's quite literally the touch tones that you hear when you punch your phone keypad. So dual tone multi-frequency suppression. So it's about how we're actually suppressing or removing those tones from sort of getting into your CDE essentially. Omnichannel and multi-channel, again, terms we'll be using. So this is about really, you know, in a modern contact center, using those digital channels such as, you know, web chat or conversational AI or SMS to communicate with your customers. And we'll also be using the term PCI DSS as well. So that's the payment card industry data security standard. So this is the actual operating sort of practice which we're talking about that's been issued by those card issuers, so Visa, MasterCard, etc. And this is the thing that if you break it, you're potentially going to get punished for. So, so Matt, I've actually hogged all of them. So I'm sorry. Would you like to do PSP?
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Steve. PSP is the organisation that you interact with when you want to make a payment. So, and then they forward that request onto the card brands such as Visa or MasterCard that you had before. And so you probably recognize some of the names like WorldPay, for example, Barclays service providers, things like that. So that's who the PSP is.
Bro, great. So without further ado, where are we? Well, I suppose you know, everything is okay until it's not. So you know, we were talking about digital transformation, how we're going to, you know, convert our businesses into, you know, this sort of omni-channel contact centers. Yeah, and then this thing called COVID-19 hit. You might be aware of it. It's had a bit of an impact over the last few months. And fair to say that's put a bit of a wrecking ball through, you know, a lot of plans that the organizations had for growth, for business as usual, you know, for projects which were ongoing. So we've sort of seen our customers sort of, certainly in the early days, they sort of fell into two boats. There was the sort of, you know, Armageddon meltdown aspect to organizations such as some of our customers in the travel and also holiday hospitality sector, and also insurance as well. As you can imagine, their call volumes were through the roof. Then we had other organizations, perhaps such as some of our retailers, you know, and sort of clothing retailers that we were working with, who clearly saw their contact volumes absolutely, you know, plunge through the floor. Matt, I don't know, I know you guys saw some interesting stuff as well in your world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned earlier that we do some core network integrated solutions around mobile recording and conferencing. And when lockdown kicked in, we were on daily calls with the product teams and the network service teams, because unsurprising, it was unprecedented change in utilization per subscriber. We saw a 750% increase in the number of minutes recorded, for example, and that was a steady, yeah, it's huge. It was a steady straight line. Every day we were on a call and it was going up, and we were wondering, when is that increase going to stop? Which is, yeah, is a huge change in the profile. And similarly around some of the payments as well. Some of the customers, like you said, some sectors, you know, very little change at all. Others a drop off. And some of that was based on the market segment they're in, and some of it was based on the technology limitations that they had around home workers.
Yeah, so it's interesting stuff. So I think on that, we're going to launch our first poll. And the question on this first one is, how have your contact centers been affected since the launch of or since the impact of COVID hit. So yeah, three options here for you to sort of choose from. Sort of, Armageddon, busier than ever. Are we now sort of back to pretty much the same as before, or have things sort of dropped significantly? So we're a few a good few months in now, so it'd be interesting to see how this has changed since our last response. So just seeing those responses come in now. So we'll leave that open for a couple more seconds just to collect the last few votes from people. That's great. Pretty much everyone now, I think, has voted, and we will close the poll and share that now. So yeah, interestingly, we're still seeing there some outliers. 14% of people still busier than ever. A third, though, have saying those volumes have still dropped significantly. But actually, I suppose it's encouraging, really, to see that almost 60% there are sort of back to those sort of pre-COVID levels. So it probably backs up some of the stuff we'll be covering over the next couple of slides. Matt, I don't know if you wanted to sort of highlight anything around those.
It's a fascinating insight, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay, so as what we're seeing then, so Gartner, this is some of the research from Gartner that was published back sort of late March, early April, and this is around the sort of technology spending patterns and industry impacts on that technology investment due to COVID. So I suppose that very much sort of ties in with what we've seen around perhaps large scale tech investment has very much been let's sort of hold our horses in certain aspects and in some sectors. But in other sectors, actually, things have been perhaps accelerated, or tactical projects have been required to actually get things back to some level of BAU. And Matt, I think you said you were seeing something sort of similar in some of the work you've been undertaking recently.
Yeah, our projects, we've had our customers realign their resource to expedite and put the projects around securing payments in the home environment now, as opposed to the contact center. We've had those put to the front of the queue. So a number of projects have been fast tracked and are live now, that were due to be live in maybe a couple of months' time, because they saw them as a requirement to taking payments, because as we talked about before, the risk profile changing for those home workers. Yeah,
absolutely. So Gartner then sort of delivered, as part of that same presentation, this sort of 4 phases for sort of leading in a disruptive crisis, as they call it. So I think when we did our last webinar, we were very much seeing people very much kind of in sort of phase 1, phase 2, which was about let's get all of our workers actually working at home. Let's get our agents at home. Let's get them functioning to some level of BAU. But we're now a few months in, and I feel that actually we may see a change, and we've got a sort of poll following this to sort of see where you guys are in these phases. But what was interesting for us is that how the lack of preparation which a lot of organisations had in terms of that home and remote working strategy, business continuity plans very much perhaps directed at fire flood. So let's get the workforce out of this building into this other building down the road. But actually, not even the government themselves foresaw the potential impact of a pandemic, and therefore the isolated or lockdown home working strategy, which many organisations are now having to deliver. So again, Matt, any sort of comments from you around that?
That phase 1, when that phase 1 hit, kind of mentioned one of the customers earlier. We were as a direct result of this, we had 10 meetings a week, so 2 a day booked in, ad hoc meetings as and when they were needed, tracking the change and making sure that everyone was on top of that change, so there were no surprises. We've seen that the cadence of those meetings has been cut down. We're now on bi-weeklies, because that phrase, the new norm, really has kicked in. The expectation of it going back to what it was before, there is no expectation from the people that we're talking to that that's going to happen. The expectation is that this increased mobility although we're in a lockdown, so we're decreased, but from an increased mobility from an out, not working in the office perspective, the expectation is there's going to be some permanent change towards that way of working.
Yeah, no, I mean, agreed. And I think that's, if there's one question that we can absolutely answer at this point, is that this crisis is going to change the way contact centres work forever. So that brings us on to our second poll question, which is really around those 4 phases and what phase you feel your company's in at the moment. So again, this week we sort of had a similar question, a few weeks ago, and for me it'd just be very interesting to see how how sort of people are differing now. So we're sort of collecting some responses. Now I can see everybody starting to vote, against those, and you can see we're leave this open for a few more seconds. Everybody's nearly there, and I will close the voting in 3, 2, 1. That's great, and we'll share them. So yeah, very interesting, and that really falls in line, I think, with probably the expected trajectory that we thought we'd see, which is now very much we're past that initial phase. A lot of us are now sort of almost through that phase 2, but a bulk of us now sort of saying, right, here we are. Let's try and look at how we're sort of looking to the future in terms of that new way of working, and some people, even ahead of that in terms of accelerating opportunities. So interesting stuff, and it has seen we can see that sort of that shift across those phases from when we last did that over the last few weeks. So what we'll do is correlate that, and we'll share that data with you after the webinar today.
Quite encouraging, isn't it? That's quite a positive set of results, really, from the people with joining the webinar. How was that different to when you did this a few weeks ago? Was the shift of that curve further forwards, and people were identifying themselves as more in the one?
Yeah, very much more sort of phase 1 and 2, a few weeks ago. So yeah, it definitely seems like UK PLC, as it were, is sort of starting to move, as we sort of suspected they would. So
certainly, we were talking about before. It echoes our own companies, doesn't it, as to where we are?
Yeah, absolutely. So sort of, what are those challenges? I suppose we've got everyone working from home now. We've got a lot of our agents working from home. So but there are innate challenges around doing that. First and foremost, I suppose, is around securing that sensitive data that we were talking about earlier. So with agents at home, are those agents taking payments? How is that data therefore being secured? As we sort of Matt mentioned earlier, that the risk profile of a home working agent is significantly increased, due to the lack of controls around that. Again, it brings us on to the sort of device network and physical security aspect of it. Are they working from their kitchen? Are they working from their lounge? Are they working from a bedroom or study? We don't know. It's very, very hard to track and audit and apply those controls around that environment. Nigh on impossible. You also have the human element, social engineering. How secure is that individual from being compromised in some capacity, and again exposing that organization to risk. And how are they dealing with those sort of digital first customers? Again, we've seen volumes of web and live chat and conversational AI going up massively during this, as people to use these other technologies to supplement their traditional workforce. How are payments, if at all, being made over those channels to ultimately increase the conversion rate and effectiveness of how you're delivering them? And then lastly, how is all that done with a quality and compliance framework as well? So how are those checks and balances being done? How is agent performance being assessed? And how is that sort of compliance framework being addressed as well for those home workers? Again, Matt, I don't know if you wanted to add sort of anything to that.
I just completely agree. The risk profile of the home worker is so different now to someone before. Before, when you're in the contact center, you've got physical security of the building, CCTV, the controls around the equipment. The fact that people are working with other people looking over their shoulder, as it were, so they know that they're being watched, as it were. So there's that side of it as well. And when we're in home working now, but we're in home working with lockdown. So, but once we're in home working with lockdown eased off, the risk profile changes again. So it's quite fluid. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose the point remains, though, that actually, just because we're in the midst of a lockdown situation, we've got a load of home workers in place, we're trying to adjust to this new normal. Actually, competition is as fierce as ever. In fact, even fiercer as we come out of the other side of this. With some organisations suffering significant financial damage, now needing to try and regain their solvency effectively. But of course, around that is we have all of these, sometimes conflicting, sometimes complementary, operating practices and legislation such as GDPR and PCI DSS. That means that we've still got to keep to this sort of compliance framework when we're trying to compete out there in the market. Matt, and I think you had some sort of interesting parallels to make with a couple of them.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. Went to PCI's show, and Jeremy King stood up and talked about how, for example, GDPR, how that matched to PCI, and how it was likely that the ICO was going to be treating payment card data as personal identifiable information, and therefore fall under scope for GDPR as well. And so that means that that clarity is coming out a bit more now. So the your contractual obligation with regards to PCI DSS suddenly becomes a regulatory obligation under GDPR, and as we all know, due to the fines being imposed, that's quite a big deal. And I think you were going to talk about something quite topical recently that's hit the news as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the point around this, and perfectly example, just last week, one of the UK's largest budget airline has obviously been hit by the Information Commissioner's Office for a sort of double whammy PCI DSS and GDPR fine for the exposure of 9 million customer records. And I know I'm speaking to a few of my staff and colleagues that they've had emails from said airline, suggesting that their data has been compromised. So, again, just because we're in the middle of a global pandemic, doesn't mean that the Information Commissioner's Office is not looking to try and inflict, a further financial penalties for people, because pandemic or not, the protection of customer data should be front and center of any board's agenda, really. So that will just bring us on nicely to question 3. So, and this is around, has home working affected your ability for your agents to take payments? So just really simple on this. It's yes, no, or we don't take payments. So yeah, we'll keep this one open. But just interesting to see how the current situation has affected that shift to home working. So just collecting those responses. We've just got the last few votes coming in, and I will close the polling in a couple of seconds. See the last couple voting there. I'll close that, and we'll share that. So yeah, I mean, as we can see, overwhelmingly from those attendees that are taking payments, it's had a significant impact, on the ability to do that. Which I mean, it tells me, I suppose, Matt, two things: that actually, yes, it's a problem, but actually, UK contact centres are taking it seriously in terms of that customer data and customer data security by not permitting that exposure to their home agents of that sensitive data. So actually, it's a problem, but it should be commended in some ways, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. The fact that people are affected by it means that they are taking seriously their customers' data, which is the number one thing, and it echoes exactly what we've seen with some customers. And I said earlier about fast tracking projects to get around the problems that you just mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose that'll bring us on to some of the sort of useful and practical guidance that we're sort of seeing and can provide at the moment around some of the top compliance strategies, within the space at the moment. So I suppose when everyone was in the office, it was possible to achieve some level of compliance without the use of technology. That cannot be done now for home workers. Even when in the office, that it was some serious heavy lifting. It was very costly, and more than that, it was extremely hard to administer and maintain. Bibles of compensating controls and so on and so forth. Completely impractical to try and do that for every single remote worker's home location and assessment. It's just not practical.
It's worth mentioning as well, Steve. We've got customers who did used to not do putting technology in place, and because it was so onerous, even when they had a contact center, we ended up moving to a technology-based approach to reduce the burden of all the controls. And like you said, with home workers, it's just not even possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So pause and resume as well. So this can be offered either in manual, which the PCI DSS aren't so keen on, or automatic form, and it addresses a small number of PCI controls, primarily around the storage of those card details, because obviously you're removing the capture of that from the call recorder. But obviously the agent is still exposed, so it doesn't really address that home working environment or that home working requirement. So again, it's sort of addressing an element of the internal, but the external is still a problem. Automated payment IVR, it does keep that card data away from home and office workers, but potentially if the agent is offboarding that customer, during that journey into the payment IVR, that can be quite disruptive. We see increased dropout rates and increased sort of payment failure rates from that as well. So it's just something to think about with that approach. Additionally, if on premise, it still requires extremely robust PCI controls around it, because obviously you're still doing the processing of the payment within your cardholder data environment, i.e. within your offices or your data centers. So one to approach with some caution there. I suppose where we're seeing a lot of our customers go, and especially customers who are wanting those home workers to start delivering payments, is really looking at technology such as DTMF suppression. So very much viewed as a sort of gold standard, I think, in terms of payment compliance. This allows you to eliminate that cardholder data environment for not only office workers, but for all of your home workers as well. And it allows what we refer to as, or what the industry referred to as, self-assessment questionnaire level A, in terms of the level of PCI certification for contact centers or merchants. In real terms, that means a 90% removal or reduction in the controls which you have to sort of address as part of the PCI standard. So a lot of heavy lifting and cost is removed when taking that approach. I suppose, Matt, as this is your new baby, would you like to sort of reference the sort of omnichannel approach a little bit?
Yeah, certainly. So customers ringing in and taking payments over the phone, as you said, DTMF is become like the de facto standard really now. But those same agents, as you mentioned earlier, omnichannel is being pushed out, giving more and more choice to customers, and so we were looking for and working with customers and being asked for how can we support taking payments with those same agents, but over different channels, such as initiated by SMS or email or web chat as a common one. So we're going to give you a demo of both of those last two actually. Steve's going to do DTMF, and I'm going to show you how the omnichannel can work. But ultimately, it's about having the same integration, so you don't have to do any heavy lifting, but still managing to service your customers through their choice of channel.
Yeah, great. So we'll have a closer look now. We're just going to do the last couple of slides, or last few slides, just to sort of set the scene from a kind of architectural, very high level architectural perspective on these solutions, and then we're actually going to get into the demos. So I'm going to try and speed up a little bit under the auspices of the time we have left. So So in our world, DTMF suppression we call agent pay, and if we look at the traditional environment, you've got customers who are calling from any one of these UK carriers, your Vodafones, Gammas, Kcons, BTs, etc. They'll be speaking those card numbers, and the agents will be listening to them and typing them into their equipment, their desktop. And again, the communication of that card number goes out to the payment service provider, who then responds back with the various details, authorized, decline, etc., etc. So that's not ideal, because obviously the card data are getting into the enterprise environment. However, we then start to bring home workers into the equation, and you've got potentially tens, dozens, hundreds of these individuals all sat at home, all being exposed to this sensitive card data. So the problem is just exacerbated and extrapolated up, as you start to roll out a home working, a true home working, remote working policy, especially if you want them to become functional revenue generating agents. So what does that mean from a sort of regulatory perspective? Well, PCI has 12 pillars or 12 requirements, and behind those sit all of the individual controls. There's over 320 individual controls which need to be addressed as part of that. So again, if you try and think about applying those 312 controls into those individual home working environments, you can start to sort of understand the scale of the problem here. So post agent pay implementation or DTMF suppression implementation, what does that look like? Well, we're actually intercepting those card details within the Speik cloud platform post implementation, and what we're doing is presenting the agent back with a series of asterisks in their workstation and a series of monotone beeps in their ear. So effectively, that enterprise equipment, and of course then if there are home workers who are using that as well, they are therefore out of the scope of PCI compliance because the card data, they are no longer exposed to it in any way, shape or form. What does that ultimately mean? Well, obviously the diagram says, green is good, and the data behind that shows us that, yeah, that absolutely is the case. 90% of those controls are removed. You're left with the production of a network diagram and an information security policy, which I'm sure any organization with above about 5 people in has those as a matter of course anyway, and also a card data flow diagram, which clearly becomes very, very easy at that point because there is no card data flow entering your environment anymore.
And
so
it's worth mentioning quickly that it's that reduction in controls, and the fact that you don't have a CDE, that means that you can move from a your SAC D to a SAC A, and that's where it makes it so much easier for you to attest that you're compliant to PCI DSS.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually should have done question 4 a little before this, but it's still very relevant. So this is really just to pick your brains around what technologies you're currently using in the contact center to address those payments. So so apologies, this should have been launched just before these slides, but just to get a view on what people are doing, and I think we'll see probably some interesting correlation there between obviously the approach with a big portion, 40% of people not taking payments currently, and the correlation between which technologies are being used at the moment. So yeah, I can just see we're almost through the voting there. Just got a couple more people by the look of it who are left to vote, so we'll allow them to do so. Okay, brilliant. Right, and we are just about there. So I'll close the poll now and share that. Yeah. So interestingly, yeah, still almost 10% of people not using a technology solution or approach at all. A large number using other methods, interesting, so web payments, IVR, etc. But a quarter of people have already adopted that DTMF suppression approach. So again, I guess we can correlate that back with the earlier poll map. We'd see that those 23% would be most likely the people who are using that technology for home working and ensuring they can take payments.
Yeah, and we're seeing, and like again, and those people aren't taking payments or having a different approach to taking payments. You've got some environments where the home workers having to push the customer to a different channel, for example, which is not ideal.
Yeah. Brilliant. So on that basis, obviously, we just sort of showed you the very conceptual principle of agent pay and how that looks. And what I'll do now is just very, very quickly, because we're sort of running a bit short on time, but we're nearly there now. We're going to show you a live demo of agent pay in action. So what I've brought up here is a representation of, you know, a CRM system, you know, ABC Corporation in this case, but you know, could be any company. And we've reached a point in the workflow here where obviously a payment needs to be made. So in this case, Miss Smith, you know, wants to make a payment amount of £30. So this is the Speik, if you like, sort of hosted payment page, and we can embed this within, you know, your sort of Salesforce or Dynamics sort of CRM platform or whatever CRM platform you're using, or it can exist as a standalone sort of hosted payment page. Now, obviously, traditionally, an agent at this point would have asked the customer to speak their card details, and the agent would have manually keyed it into this card number field here. The workflow changes very slightly with agent pay, though, and the agent will say, Mr. Customer, in a moment, I want you to actually key in your card details using a telephone keypad. The agent presses that start button, and we can see there's some appearance bubbles which appear here. And this is just, this panel here I'm using is just to simulate a customer at home, either on their landline or their iPhone or Android. And they will then punch in their card number, their PAN, primary account number, the long card number. And as you can see, there's a series of stars appear, and the agent here is a series of monotone beeps in their ear. And we do a couple of checks on that card. We identify what type of card it is. So in this case, we can see it's a valid Visa card. And the agent at this point can say, yep, thanks very much, Miss Smith. I've captured your Visa card number. And if Miss Smith goes, oh, Visa, sorry, I meant to give you my MasterCard, it's very, very easy for the agent to click restart in that field and allow Miss Smith to re-enter her card details for the correct card. Likewise, the process is then followed very, very simply for the expiry date. You know, we're looking for a forward-facing date there. And then finally, the 3 digits on the back of the card, the CV2 or the CSC, and we input those. So at this point, obviously, in terms of the workflow, it's very, very simple, it's very straightforward. We've captured those relevant numbers. We'll submit that payment off, and we come back communicating with the payment service provider, your existing payment service provider who we've integrated to, and we get the authorization code, you know, with a success or a decline or so on. So that's all well and good, but what we often get asked is, what about those customers who you know, are unable to use the keypad effectively, unable to use DTMF? And this is where we add what's a unique capability in as standard to the product here, and this is the opportunity to capture by voice. So if this is in line with, you know, what's now the Equalities Act, used to be the Disabilities Discrimination Act. The agent can toggle using this button up here in the top right, and you'll see the appearance of the screen subtly changes. So we now have a you know, human head with some sound waves coming off it, and this gives the customer the opportunity to actually speak their card number. And what we do is we block that transmission in the Speik cloud, and we use a speech recognition engine to capture those card details. So what you'll see is the agent will say, you'll hear a beep, I want you to speak your card number, you'll hear a second beep, and then I'll be back on the line again with you. And we provide a countdown there for the customer to do that. And the customer speaks their card number, and of course, the agent appears, sees a series of stars and a series of monotone beeps. And yeah, Miss Smith has spoken her card number in this case. If at any point she gets into difficulty, stutters, the engine is tuned very finely to recognize, you know, numeric characters, and will interrupt that transmission, and the agent can come in and say, oh, Miss Smith, I understand you might have got into difficulty there. I'll restart that process for you. And we do exactly the same, of course, with the expiry date and with the security code as well. And the end goal is the same. We've securely captured that data. We submit it, and we go off and we achieve that that payment. So that is a very quick whistle-stop tour of Agent Pay. I'm now going to move on and pass control to Matthew, and he's going to take you through the omni-channel solution for multi-channel payments. So Matt, I will make you presenter.
Thank you very much, Steve. Here we go. So hopefully everyone can see my screen now and my desktop. And what I'm showing you is I have my mobile phone, and my mobile phone is now duplicated. I've got it mirrored onto the desktop so that you can see what I'm doing on my phone at the same time. And when I'm working on my phone, I'm going to be the customer, but I'm also going to be the agent. And this browser Chrome here is running as if I'm the agent. So in this example, we said before, it's the same integration, but what happens is a different screen is presented to the agent. So instead of going straight into the DTMF screen that you saw Steve give a demonstration on a moment ago, what we do here is the agent can click on a different screen. So Secure Capture will take me through to the DTMF screen, and this button will take me through to a different option where I've got the ability to interact with that customer in a slightly different way. So the first example I'm going to do is I'm going to send myself a link, and that link is going to provide via SMS. And I, as the customer, you'll see I've just had a link pop up on my phone. I'm going to follow that link, and I'm going to click on a link. And now, whilst the agent's talking to the customer, explaining to me what I need to do, so I need to put in my card number, and I can type that in manually. Or if you're using an Android or an iPhone, it can take the existing cards that you've already got in your list. So I've got an autofill, a bit like Steve did a moment ago. I can autofill it. If I want to, I can overwrite that. It's not a problem. I can enter my CV2 number, and I can put in a number. I can put in all of this is fake data, obviously. I can put in my address, and I can put in a postcode. Here we go. And I can click submit once I've completed. And so I, as a customer, have just typed in that data into the web page, and the agent can then continue on in exactly, there we go. It is a live demo. It can continue on in the same way as before, and I can get to the same, I've completed a successful route. So that's a really simple flow of the agent interacting with the customer, asking them to make a payment via the SMS link. Another option that I've got, though, is if I'm working in web chat, then instead of sending the link via SMS, I can copy that link to clipboard, and I can paste that link in to web chat. So now I've received this message as a customer through a web chat, and I've got a link. I can then click on that link, and I can bring that exact same screen up that you saw on the phone, really simple, and I can type in all of the details using using my browser, go back to the web chat and say, thanks very much, I've completed the data, and then the agent just completes in exactly the same way. And this integration of this page is the same integration as the DTMF suppression page that you saw before, and all of the results flow back into your CRM system exactly the same way.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point, Matt. So again, using that same integration to achieve the end result across those payments. I think another thing which is really smart is obviously the ability to use the innate capabilities of the biometric layer of the iPhone and the Android, which again just adds that extra layer of security and compliance in for end customers, as well as protecting merchants such as the contact centers using it. So yeah, really good stuff. So I should have control back and be showing my screen again now. And I suppose we just wanted to wrap up. We're going to do some quick questions in a second, but just wanted to sort of end up with some key takeaways, really, I suppose, off the back of today's webinar. And I think what we really wanted to impress on people was that the risk profile of home workers is very, very different from those in the office. The best solution really to addressing and dealing with that is to remove the cardholder data environment entirely, because ultimately that allows home workers to become a far more valuable asset to the business. It allows that revenue generation. If we have 43% of the agents on this webinar not taking payments, just think about the value that could add, allowing those people to sort of be taking payments once again. There are technologies there which exist to support that omnichannel approach to taking payments, so they can really align with your digital transformation strategy in terms of how you want to integrate and interact with customers. And again, that point around a single integration can support all of those channels as well. So we are offering some remote workshops available to help assess risk profile, and the options open to you guys. So we can follow up, and we'll provide contact details at the end of this webinar if that's an exercise, a free of charge exercise, which you'd like to pick up with us after this. So we'll just move on very quickly. We'll open up the questions now. So if you do have any questions for Matthew or myself, please let's input them. I'm going to open up. We've had a few come in actually already. So let's have a look. Why don't we just use agent pay by link instead of full DTMF suppression? So agent pay by agent is one of the questions that's come in. So Matt, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's one we've heard before actually. So a bit as we said earlier, omnichannel, you're giving customers a choice of how they're ringing it. In order to, you saw with the demonstration I did before, in order to do the pay by link, I need to either be at a computer or on my phone, so I can, or on a smartphone, so I can get to a web page. That's not viable if you're ringing into a contact center using a landline, for example. So it's not one horse for all. So our suggestion is it adds an extra option for your customers, and you would like to. We're always trying to respond to a customer by the channel that they've contacted you on. So it's an additional capability, the way that we're seeing it, rather than a replacement. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I think, just to sort of to back that up, it really, I think it was, we sort of referenced before, it should just be another tool in the armory for the contact center, really. So, a customer, might want to do that over the phone. You have to be able to ultimately provide choice, and that choice within a framework as well. So so how does the second question, sorry, so how does the omnichannel solution integrate with other systems? How would it work with live chat agents, which we already use?
Hopefully, I don't know if that question came in before or after the demo. The way that with that example I just saw, the agent would launch the payment screen, and from their CRM, just like they normally would do if they're over the phone, and it auto generates the link. You can configure the messaging, and so when I showed you pasting that into Word, we can configure what the message is that you put, so that the agents don't have to type, and then the agents just hit the copy to clipboard button and paste it into the link to that customer, and then continue to chat with them in a normal way to guide them through the instruction to complete it.
Yeah. Okay. We've got last couple of questions here, actually. So what's the resource impact on my organization for deploying the solutions outlined? Yeah, so it's good. It's a good question. It does differ by organization, to be fair. There's always a team, a broad team that's needed with regards to the deployment of DTMF or omnichannel payment solution, because you need to understand who owns that payment provider relationship. So you'll have that side of things. You'll have then obviously the sort of project and sort of delivery side of things. You'll have then the telephony layer as well. So there are a number of different work streams which need to be managed carefully to ensure that everyone's sort of everyone's tracking in the right direction on these. I suppose the beauty of it is that we have the telephony integrations already delivered and integrated with a number of major carriers, including our own IPI cloud. This really circumvents and lessens that time to impact. So does lessen the resource requirements, certainly from customer side and also from external third-party side as well. I don't know if you wanted to add anything more to that, Matt.
No, you've hit the nail on the head. There are 3 integration touch points. There's the telephony, as you mentioned, there's the PSP, and there's the CRM. We've got experience with a wide range of those across the board. We did a presentation earlier when we were allowed to leave the house in January, based around, you mentioned the project side of it. Certainly a key takeaway would be to ensure that you've got kind of one true owner of a project to make sure that you can really manage all of the stakeholders across those different areas.
Good stuff. And the final question we've had come in is how are the solutions charged? There's always the price question that comes up, obviously, at the end of these. So these are both true SaaS products. They're charged on sort of consumption-based SaaS licensing models. And that varies depending on volume. So more agents and transactions, the lower the price, essentially. So yeah, we're happy to share that data with sort of individuals on this call at the end of the webinar. So that rounds off today's webinar. I appreciate we've run over slightly, but hopefully you found the sort of combination of sort of intelligence, slideware, and live demos useful. As I said, we're running those remote workshops, which we'll be very happy to follow up with you all afterwards. And a copy of the slides and a link to the recording will also be available afterwards. So on that note, it just remains for me to say thank you very much again for your time. Matt, thank you very much as well for joining us today. And we'll be back very soon with our next IPI webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.